What if I told you that climate change is slowly progressing as years goes by and its effects has already manifested in many ways? Well, that is the case happening right now in the real world. Greetings to everyone, especially to our dear panelists. Today we will be discussing a research study entitled A Qualitative Study on the Impacts of Climate Change on the Local Farmers Palay of Barangay Dominorog, Calabanga, Camarines Sur. I am Jerard Benedick o Caguicla from SE1K, and together with me is Amor Borja to discuss and defend to all of you our research proposal. We have here our overview to have a glimpse of how the presentation will go. So as you can see on your screen, we'll talk about the following components in the chapter 1, 2, and 3, and as well as provide other necessary details to further back up our paper. So without any further ado, let's start discussing the chapter 1. As everybody knows, climate change has long been an issue worldwide. In fact, according to the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration or the NOAA, the global temperature rose about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit from 1901 to 2020. These implications resulted in more negative repercussions such as the shrinking of the glaciers, the rising of carbon dioxide in the atmospheres, and all sorts of things. Given that our country is currently experiencing an intense heat for the past 5 years, it's safe to say that all of this is the effects of climate change. Due to all of this, many sectors as well in our world have also been affected, e.g. in health, the rise of people being diagnosed with heat stroke, in economy, the loss of revenues brought about by climate change and such. But the noteworthy one is its implications on agriculture. Drought, too much rain, rising of temperatures have resulted in the dying of many crops globally. Farmers in certain geographical areas are starting to have some revenue loss due to these problems. In the Philippines, the effects of climate change can also be observed. The capital city of the Philippines, which is Manila, is included in the 6 places that will face the most severe consequences due to climate change. In fact, farmers as well in Bicol region are also no excuse for this. According to the study of Laureta et al. Entitled Climate Vulnerability Scenario of the Agricultural Sector in the Bicol River Basin, Philippines, farmers and their crops is becoming more and more vulnerable due to the effects of strengthening typhoons, frequent flooding, and the ever-changing switching of temperatures. Not to mention the existence of El Nino and El Niña present here in our country, which has been becoming more intense as time goes by. Having all of this said, the researchers then decided to conduct the study primarily to assess the impacts of climate change on the local farmers of Calabanga, as well as to know what they do in order to cope up with this problem so that we may be able to implement recommendations and solutions to other farmers, not just locally but internationally, who's experiencing the same problems like this one. Since then again, the problems brought about by climate change in agricultural sector is huge, we decided to conduct this study. So pinili po namin ang Calabanga na place since we already know farmers there. So palay naman po yung pinili namin for the crops because then again, most farmers in Calabanga plant palay. So in terms of like the availability of the farmers, we can maximize our research there. Now, let's proceed with the objectives. We have here 2 objectives. First is the general objectives and the second one is the specific objectives. For the general objective, to determine the impacts of climate change on the local farmers of Barangay Dominorog, Calabanga, because then again, that's our main objective to determine how specific climate change has affected these farmers. For example, did they lost crops or blah blah blah. For the specific objectives, we have here 3. To determine how does palay grow during dry and rainy seasons over the past 5 years, to determine how does climate change impact the farmers and their income and production rate, to determine in what ways and or method the farmers take in order to cope up with the dry and rainy season, low income, and low production rate. So we want to determine how does the palay grow or like has been affected due to the dry and rainy season, because then again the Philippines only has 2 seasons, the dry and rainy one, over the past 5 years. We choose 5 years as our time for this study because we are still unsure of the availability of the materials, like the resources that we will be able to get once we do our research. So for us to be safe, we put there first the 5 years, but there are available resources or like materials that we can gather for our data for like about 10 years. Then we may change that to 10 years depending on the farmers and as well as our interview with the Department of Agriculture. The second one is to determine how does climate change impact the farmers on their income and production rate, because then again, the main impacts of climate change when is their palay. And when their palay is affected, of course, the production rate of palay and the income will also be affected. It's kind of like connected all throughout. So after that, we will determine what ways or method did the farmers did in order to cope up with the aforementioned with the dry season, rainy season, low income, and low production rate. So we want to know like whether or not did they plant other like no crop, or did they ask for the government assistance, or did they have or like did they execute planting hacks in order for them to battle up climate change or blah blah blah. Now let's proceed with the statement of the problem. It's kind of like similar to our objective, so I'll just read it out. First is how does Palay grow over 5 years during the following season, dry and rainy season? How does climate change impact the farmers of Barangay Dominorog, Calabanga, Camarines Sur on income and production rate? And what ways or method the farmers did in order to cope up with the following dry rainy season, low income, low production rate? So for the other part of the chapter 1, let's call Amor.
Thank you, Jerard, for our significance of the study. This research will benefit the farmers, community, market vendors, environmentalists, Department of Agriculture, and the future researchers. Farmers will gain from this study because they will understand how climate change has impacted their farming practices. The community will benefit from this study because consumers are market's main buyers of commodities. They will be able to comprehend the reasons behind a particular crop's price increase and purchase substitutes. Given that they purchase products from farmers, market vendors will gain from this study. They will be able to comprehend while the quality of these crops varies. The environmentalist will gain from this research since it addresses a topic that is relevant to their work. The Department of Agriculture will gain from this study since it will enable them to suggest ideas to better serve farmers and create a nurturing and fostering atmosphere. Sa pamamagitan ng research na ito, maaaring gamitin ito ng mga future researchers na interesado sa impact of climate change sa agrikultura. Let us now proceed to scope and the limitations. The study will examine the effects of climate change on the palay grown by local farmers in Barangay Dominorog, Calabanga, Camarines Sur, who have been doing so for at least 5 years. 10 farmers will be the maximum number of responders, and they will only be chosen using a convenient snowball sampling. Now we are done with our Chapter 1. Let us now proceed to the theoretical framework on Chapter 2. This study discusses regime and Milankovitch theories, climate change adaptation, crop production systems, and landscape planning. Regime theories 2016 contends that nation-states play a major role in international talks. According to Krasner 1982, regimes are principles, norms, rules, and decision-making procedures around which actor expectations converge in a given issue area. Samantala, ang Milankovitch theory naman ay in-explain nito kung paanong sun, earth, and astronomical theory related sa isa't isa. Depending on the circumstances of the climate change event, geographical location, asset base, and livelihood strategies, vulnerable populations have diverse adaptation techniques to mitigate the future climate change damages. Let us now proceed to conceptual paradigm. This presentation provides an overview of the conceptual foundation for this research. It should be emphasized that the Milankovitch and regime theories served as the intellectual foundation for this work. Kailangan namin pumunta sa Calabanga para personal naming makausap ang mga magsasakang napili o mga maaari naming interview, for us to know how palay grows in different seasons as indicators in determining the impacts, their strategies for coping up problems with income and production rate, and landscaping. This may serve as the foundation for the policy orientation that aim to advance agriculture. Let us now proceed to review of related literature and studies. Climate change and global warming are among the topics that people talk about the most in today's society, according to Iskanzik et al. 2021. Crop output and agricultural pests are significantly impacted by climate change and harsh weather occurrences. Iba-iba ang pagtugon ng mga insekto sa iba't ibang pinagmumula ng climate change gaya ng karaniwang mga nilalang na umagop. They may cause their geographic range to spread, their overwintering survival to increase, the number of generations to increase, the synchrony between plants and pests to change, and the interaction between the species to change. Bilang resulta, ang mga pagkalugi sa ekonomiya ng agrikultura ay isang maitinding alalahanin at seguridad ng pagkain ng tao ay nasa panganib. Future study on the impacts of climate change on agricultural insect pests might be prioritized according to a number of factors. May we call on Mr. Caguicla to discuss some part of Chapter 3.
For that, Amor, now let's discuss Chapter 3. Let's start with the research design. In this study, the qualitative case study evaluate method was employed to ascertain the effects of climate change on the local farmers Palay in Calabanga, Camarines Sur. So to explain precisely, we choose 5 years again, as mentioned, because we are still unsure of the availability of the data we will be able to collect. And data are available, let's say, over the course of 10 years, then we will consider that as long as the data are still relevant to the topic. Moreover, this is a qualitative study since then again we're going to be getting the insights of and understand the experiences of the farmers over such time that the climate change has impacted them, particularly case methodology then we use, and since our respondents are farmers, and it would help us to better understand their experiences and also to reduce any possible biases by being more objective and things like that. This study aims to determine the impacts of climate change on the local farmers of Barangay Dominorog, Calabanga, Camarines Sur, on April 29, 2023, over the course of 1 day, Saturday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So it will only occur in the span of a day, primarily on April 29, 2023, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So we will be conducting at this day since it is the most convenient time for us because we can't do it in weekdays since we have school, and then Saturday is the only day for us. Despite it being conducted within a day only, we will still ensure to gather all the necessary data in order to back up our paper and coordinate well with the officials in Barangay Dominorog. For the respondents of the study, it will be the local farmers of Calabanga, Camarines Sur, particularly in Barangay Dominorog. The study's participants are limited to 10 farmers only, to be selected through convenience, snowball, and non-random sampling. So for this study, we will be using the convenience and snowball sampling under the non-random sampling because we specifically choose the participants in our study based on the criteria that we set, such as farmers living or residing in Barangay Dominorog, has planted that for about 5 years and such as that. We will be using snowball sampling to get recommendations from other farmers that can help us with our research. Respondent, it is still subject to change. We wrote there 10, but then the number may still vary depending on the availability of the respondents. Alright, now let's proceed with the data collection method. The researchers will collect the data in this study by direct interview as mentioned before, since the number of target respondents is few. The researchers, with the permission of the barangay captain, will request for a meeting with the farmers respondents in their barangay hall or like in available place to conduct this study. So we will submit a formal request to the barangay captain and other officials needed to conduct study there, and as well as to ask assistance for us in doing our research. The questions will revolve around the impacts of climate change or the SOP, and then in order to validate the collected information, the researchers will attain the insights of an expert. The interview will follow a semi-structured format, and follow-up questions shall be raised only when it is necessary. So as mentioned, we will be getting the insights of the respondents through their experiences based on the made questionnaire. After namin nakuha yun, we will then arrange or a consultation with the Department of Agriculture in Calabanga or other agency section in this study in order to validate the results and also as well to get their opinions on the same topic. To discuss further what's left for chapter 3, let's call on Amor.
For our data gathering procedures, the researchers must first obtain the barangay captain's approval before doing any data collection on their property. Then, the researchers would decide which farmers they wanted to include in their study. The researchers would then set up all the conditions needed. Before the interview, the respondents will get a permission letter from the researchers, which they must complete and return in order to grant their consent to be included in the study and for their comments to be recorded. The interviewer will now begin asking the respondents related questions after getting their consent. If required, follow-up queries will be put out. For our data analysis, researchers will classify the information they have gathered after the interview. The researchers will evaluate each response within the gathered data to see whether it differs from or is comparable to other responses. Following that, the researchers will talk about how to further understand the data. Then, interpretations and deductions related to the suggested statement of the problem will be made. That's all. Thank you.
This will be the end of our research presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Now, if you have any questions that you wish to clarify, you may message us at our Gbox account presented on the screen. Again, this has been Jerard, Benedick, Caguicla, and Amor, Francesca, Borja. Thank you very much for listening.